The janitor at my old high school was always a little off. He was this tall, thin guy with a face that was always hidden under the brim of his old, dirty cap. His eyes were too dark, like he hadn't seen the sun in years. And when he spoke, it was like his voice came from somewhere far away, as if it didn't quite match the rest of him. We used to joke about him, but after that Friday evening, I stopped laughing. It was a rainy night, and most of the school was empty. I had stayed late with a few friends to finish up a group project. The hallways were quiet, and the lights flickered in a way that made it feel like the building itself was breathing. We were just wrapping up, laughing and joking, when we heard it, soft at first, like a whisper through the walls. "Do you hear that?" Brian asked, his voice tense. We all listened. At first, it sounded like muffled voices, but it wasn't just talking. There was something rhythmic about it, almost like chanting. It came from the janitor's department, down in the old, dimly lit part of the school that no one ever really went to. Probably just the janitor watching TV or something, Jacob suggested, but there was a hesitation in his voice. I wasn't so sure. The sound was wrong. It wasn't like any chant I'd ever heard, not like anything you'd hear at school or in any kind of normal setting. It was dark, almost eerie, and it seemed to echo through the walls, growing louder and more intense with each passing second. "We should check it out," I said, even though my heart was already racing in my chest. Brian and Jacob looked at each other, but neither of them said anything. They both knew what I meant, but neither wanted to go. Still, we slowly made our way down the hallway, past the abandoned classrooms until we reached the janitor's office. The door was cracked open. We could see the faint flicker of light coming from inside. The chanting was louder now, and it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It wasn't like a prayer or anything we'd recognize. It was deep and guttural, like something ancient. I pushed the door open a little more, just enough to peek inside. The janitor was there, standing in the middle of the room. He was facing a small makeshift altar made of old books and strange symbols drawn on the floor in chalk. The air smelled thick, like something rotten, and there was a strange flickering light coming from a candle that sat on the altar. He didn't seem to notice us, his back turned, muttering in a language I couldn't understand. The floor beneath him seemed to shift, as if something was moving under the wood. I wanted to shout, to pull my friends back, but I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, my eyes locked on the scene before me. Then the chanting stopped. The janitor turned, and for the first time I saw his eyes, wide and black, as if they had swallowed every ounce of light in the room. His lips curled into a twisted grin, and he spoke, his voice low and raspy. "You shouldn't have come." I swear, I saw the shadows around him twitch, like they were alive, reaching out toward us. In that moment, I didn't know what was worse. The feeling that something dark had been brewing in that room for years, or the fact that we had just stumbled into it. Without a word, I grabbed Brian's arm and yanked him back. Jacob was already ahead of us, running down the hall, his footsteps echoing in the silence. We didn't stop until we were outside in the rain, breathing hard and shaking. None of us said a word. We didn't need to. We knew what we had seen, and we knew what it meant. The janitor was involved in something dark, something we had no business being near. We never spoke of that night again. And I never stayed at the school late after that. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear the chanting, faint but unmistakable, coming from the depths of the school. And I wonder if the janitor is still there, still waiting for someone to wander too close. I'm sure my high school was haunted. I could feel it in the air, in the way the building creaked and groaned at night, but the worst place was always the science lab. I hated being in there, even when it was full of students. The fluorescent lights buzzed like they were trying to tell me something. The shadows in the corners seemed to shift, even when no one was moving. I tried to tell my friends, Brian and Jacob, but they always laughed it off. "You're just paranoid," Brian would say with a grin. "It's just an old building, that's all." Jacob would nod, agreeing with him, but I could see the way his eyes darted around the room when we were in there, like he wasn't sure himself. But I knew something was off. The worst thing was the smell. It wasn't the usual scent of chemicals or old textbooks that you'd expect in a science lab. No, this was something deeper. damp, like something had been soaked into the walls for years. Some days, it was so strong that I had to fight the urge to gag. One afternoon, I stayed behind after class to finish up a project. Everyone else had gone, and the hallways were silent. The lab was colder than usual, and the lights flickered as I worked. I thought it was just me being paranoid again, but I kept hearing noises, like faint whispers. At first, I figured it was just the wind or the pipes settling, but then the whispers got louder, and I realized they were coming from the back of the room, the back corner of the lab, the one with the dusty old storage cabinets that no one ever opened. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. Hello? My voice cracked as I spoke, and the room seemed to get even colder. The whispers stopped. The silence was deafening. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was nothing, just my imagination running wild. But then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, a shadow, no, a figure, moved along the far wall. It was tall, dark, and featureless, like a person, but not quite. It flickered, as if it couldn't decide if it wanted to be real. I froze. My legs felt like lead. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. Suddenly, I wasn't alone anymore. I heard footsteps, slow, dragging, like something heavy was being pulled across the floor. The sound came from the back of the room. I slowly turned, hoping to see nothing, but there, in the dim light, I saw a shape, a figure hunched over, moving toward me. My heart stopped. I wanted to run, but my body wouldn't move. The figure stopped just a few feet away, its shape still blurry and shifting. Then a voice, low and raspy, whispered in my ear, "Get out!" I didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed my bag and bolted for the door, nearly tripping over my feet in my panic. The moment I stepped out into the hallway, the air seemed to clear and the weight on my chest lifted. I didn't stop running until I was outside in the fresh air. The next day, I told Brian and Jacob about what happened, but they just shrugged it off. "You're imagining things," Jacob said with a nervous laugh. "But I know what I saw, and I know what I felt." The science lab was haunted, and no amount of convincing would ever change that. I never went back in there alone again, and I'd tell anyone who asked, "Don't go near that lab, not after hours." It's not just the chemicals that make it dangerous. The gym in my old high school was built in the 1600s, and from the moment I set foot in it, I knew something wasn't right. It wasn't just the dusty smell that clung to the air or the old wooden bleachers that creaked with every step. No, it was something deeper, something that gnawed at my insides, especially when I was there alone. I played on the school's soccer team, and practice often ran late into the evening. The last one to leave, I'd find myself in the locker room, changing out of my sweaty gear as the light from the flickering bulbs above buzzed like an insect trapped in a jar. Every time I'd stand in front of the old metal lockers, my skin would crawl. The gym had a way of making me feel like I wasn't truly alone. Even though I'd be the only one there, the air seemed filled with something, or someone, just out of sight. It started with the sounds. At first, I thought it was just the old pipes, but then I began to hear footsteps. Slow, deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. It wasn't coming from the hall or from anyone outside the locker room. No, it was coming from inside. I would turn, expecting to see someone, but no one was ever there. And then, the whispers. At first, they were faint, just the soft murmur of voices, like people talking behind a door. But when I'd press my ear to the cold stone walls, the voices grew louder, clearer. They spoke in a language I couldn't understand, as if they were long forgotten echoes from the past. The worst, though, were the showers. I always hated showering in that gym, but sometimes I had no choice. The moment I stepped into the steamy room, the air would grow thick and heavy. It felt like someone was watching me. I could hear the faint sound of water running, but I was alone. Then, I would hear footsteps again. This time, slow, dragging, as if someone was walking in the wet tiles, moving closer. My heart would race, my skin would prickle, and I'd practically run out of there, my feet skidding on the damp floor. One evening, it was worse than ever. I was changing quickly, trying to avoid the usual dread that crept up my spine when I heard something I couldn't ignore. "Help." A voice, low and hoarse, whispered my name. I froze. My body locked in place, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't tell if it was the wind, the building settling, or something else entirely. But then came the sound of someone walking, slowly, methodically, down the hall outside the locker room. Each footstep was heavier, closer. I knew no one else was supposed to be there. I grabbed my bag, not caring how I looked, and ran for the exit. But as I reached the door, I swore I saw something. Just a flash, a dark shape in the corner of my eye. It was tall, its form shifting like a shadow, but I couldn't make out its face. The door slammed shut behind me, and for a moment, everything went still. My heart hammered in my chest as I turned to look back, but the gym was empty, dead silent. I never went back to that gym alone after that night, and I never will.